Hi. Hi, so this is In Search of the Anima Mundi, Part 7, Michaela Villiers-Kendall, Memories, Reflections, and Nightmares. When I actually started this series, which was, December 2017, just before the solstice, in fact, the winter solstice, I had a mind then to experimentally follow the golden thread through the labyrinth. That was the premise, in search of the world soul, which is the anima mundi. It's an alchemical phrase. If you've seen any of the other parts, I don't want to go over old ground, so I don't really want to explain too much about it, but it is necessary to watch the other parts. But having said that, you can still pick up quite a lot, I expect, from just watching now. But it would be good too if you watched the film The Shining and the film I started with, which was Pan's Labyrinth. Because of the premise being to go through the labyrinth, I decided to start with Pan's Labyrinth. And I used the film to gain insight as to what the anima mundi was and how to search for it. And I must say, through the series, I've got more than I bargained for, really. I've learned a lot, because I really didn't have a huge idea what the anima mundi was, except for the world soul, except for it being connected with alchemists. I've done quite a lot of research into Nostradamus, and obviously I'm an evolutionary astrologer and Jungian psychological astrologer. So anyway, having said that, I'll go on to the first slide. Thanks. Okay, so this is the chimera, a mythological creature, and strangely enough, it is a creature that in the Gnostic law, in the Gnostic teachings, which is what my research into The Shining, which is the next movie I went into, I think it's 4 parts I've done now, I'm still in it. It's sort of like the Hotel California, you can check out, but you can never leave. We all sort of feel like that right now, don't we? Yeah, it's too close to home. Anyway, this is the chimera, and this is the creature that was created by the fallen angel, Satan, who was known in the Gnostic teachings as Abraxas, and there are other names. So be created by the demiurge, which was actually created by Sophia, the Great Mother, if you know anything about the Kabbalah and the Tree of Life and Gnosticism. So in the Christian Kabbalah, in the Christian Gnostics, they said that the chimera was created by the demiurge, and it was a creature that was never meant to be, and the Sophia accidentally created it. It's a long story, so I won't go into that now, but anyway, so strangely enough, it's a hybrid, and that's how you might describe this coronavirus, COVID-19. And as I said recently, actually, I did a post on Evolutionary Astrology on Linda's site, the group, and about the words, because the word is very important in the Kabbalah, in Gnosticism, and also obviously numbers, everything is mathematical. The Hebrew letters, it's huge, actually. And I felt a bit out of my depth, especially when I realized that Kubrick had multi-layered Gnostic meanings in his film, but not just meanings of Gnosticism and the Kabbalah and the Tree of Life and the Tree of Death and the Qliphoth and mythology and even the Bible. But it turns out he actually did base all this on the constellations, which is what the Gnostics did. And so was Greek mythology, Roman mythology, Norse mythology, and the Bible, it would seem. all based on the constellations, not literal at all. And I will go into that, but that was his main premise, to say we have got our minds stuck in what he called also Wetiko, which I did bring up when I did the pandemic cast. I talked about Wetiko because that was the other thing that Kubrick came up with in The Shining. Wetiko is the same thing really as Abraxas, the same thing as the demiurge. It's the mind virus that the Native American Indians spoke of, especially the Hopi. And there is actually a Hopi, which we will get to. We'll get to a slide of the Hopi mural on the wall of the Overlook Hotel in The Shining. Because they knew it, and many other ancient civilizations knew it as, they called it the Wetiko. But he obviously, and I did find out the books he must have been reading, because there was a book that came out that I did mention in that cast about Wetiko, the mind virus. I'll just show you the book. This is called Dispelling, if you can see that. Dispelling Wetiko. This isn't the original book. This is a very good book that Paul Levy has brought out, I think, in 2013, based on the original book Columbus and Other Cannibals by Jack Forbes, and which was pretty obvious. That's what Kubrick was meaning when he made his Native American Indian references. The mind virus is the virus of the mind, and here we are, as I did point out in that cast. Here we are with the virus of the body that is sort of, it is bringing out the virus of the mind in us, and perhaps it's eradicating it in some ways. It seems like it's having a transmutational effect, not kind, not, well, it is extremely painful actually in some ways. But then, as Jung said, and that brings me to Jung too, I'll just finish about the chimera before I go into Jung. So the chimera is this three-headed monster. The lion, that's actually a lioness, even though it has a mane. It's meant to be a lioness, and has the tail of a snake, the serpent, and the goat, the head of the goat, which is very appropriate since the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, as you all know, conjunct the south node of Saturn took place in Capricorn. And this was what, as I was saying, I sort of had in mind when I started the series, as many other astrologers have been preparing, probably for years. I mean, I prepared myself from 2012 when I started to get what the astrologer Lynn Burbeck, because I did consult him about it, what he said was channeling. I started to get all sorts of disaster sort of, well, things about the Titanic and other disasters, and about this obsession with finding the meaning of evil. And that sort of, but also I got a lot about astrology that I hadn't gone into before, like the eclipses. I did loads of research on it all. But he said that it was channeling, and I didn't know at that time, but I did find out that it was the 2012 shift, when the precessional sun went into the dark rift, which was sort of a big phase into the awakening, a big phase towards the new age of Aquarius, which took place for 4 years. And then the next phase, when it came out of the rift, was 2016. And then, of course, 4 years later, or at 2020, when we hit the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, and Uranus in Taurus conjunct the south node of Chiron, which is very, very mixed up in all of this as well. It's too literal. It's so amazing. Anyway, so it's a hybrid, and someone described, I saw an article that described the coronavirus as a hybrid that should never have been, produced from bats and pangolins and rats, even the year of the rat, and possibly from the laboratory. They are admitting that now. They say for health purposes they were experimenting and it went wrong. That's what is said. You don't know what to believe, but it sounds feasible. It's only 10 miles. The laboratory is 10 miles from the wet market, which they conveniently blamed for it, but I honestly don't believe it. And these biological laboratories are all over the world, and so it's not just in China. And they produce, it's for weapons, basically, biological warfare. So in any case, man has messed with nature, abused it in so many ways. The planet, Gaia, Sophia, the planet. So that's the chimera, and strangely enough, the chimera has materialized quite incredibly. So anyway, shall we go on to the next? Yeah. So that is the Sophia. That's a painting by Neil Haig, I think it is. I can't see, but I think he's called Neil Haig. A very good artist and Gnostic teacher, and he's on. I'll put his details on the group if I can at some stage. But anyway, he does some very good paintings and some teachings, and that is the Sophia. So you've got Gaia there, the Sophia, the Earth, the all-seeing eye. You've got the Sophia, which is represented by the bird, the white dove, and also Isis. So she's embodied by Isis as well. Obviously the sun there, and then you've got the pyramids, the Great Pyramids, Giza, which are lined up with the star constellation of Orion. And there you've got Orion's belt and Sirius, and so it's all linked in, and it's quite amazing. It's astounding, the depth to it all, but all of this is coming up now, and it would seem it's infiltrating its way into all our lives, not just astrologers and Gnostics and Kabbalists and Christians also. It's engulfing all our lives as we turn into the age of Aquarius, and now we're like a ship heading into the night. As I said on the cast, the Saturn-Pluto cast, we're at the darkest hour. We've just passed the darkest hour. Probably we are heading towards the dawn, although it doesn't feel like it because we're still in the dark. But that is represented by the midnight sun of 0 degrees Capricorn, which actually, amazingly, is brought up in The Shining. So a lot of things I'll be saying actually is from later in The Shining, and unfortunately I was hoping to get into room 237 at last, but I didn't make it. I didn't make it this time because I felt I had to explain myself when I mentioned the horses of the apocalypse. You know, you don't mention the 4 horses of the apocalypse without explaining yourself. So there I go, I have to say something about it. And it's delayed getting to room 237, but I hope to, hopefully next time. Anyway, so we'll just go. I can't say too much about the Sophia now because we haven't got time. But okay, so this is this comes up in the apartment. Funnily enough, if you can get hold of the, as I've said before, the American version of The Shining, not the European DVD, because they cut out some of the really useful scenes that did give a lot of clues to what Kubrick was talking about. So try and get hold of the American one. Anyway, so this actually, there was no picture of this, but what this is represented by the letter He, which is in the Kabbalah, which I explained in the other videos that that Kubrick brought into The Shining, along with the Tree of Life. And this is Eve. This is Blake's painting of Eve being created from Adam's rib. It's in the shape of He, which the He is in the shape of the elevator of blood, if you've seen the film, but obviously you'll understand when you see it if you haven't. So just going on to the next slide, which explains this. Oh, by the way, that, as I put on there, Eve, Isis, Inanna, that just doesn't represent Eve. That represents the Great Mother. It represents the Sophia. It represents Isis and even Lilith. So, so there we are. That's the crossover shot in the apartment. That's just Adania's had just had the vision of the elevator of blood. And the elevator so is superimposed behind Wendy there. And so she is in the position of Eve in that picture very cleverly. I mean, you know, Kubrick was brilliant, much too brilliant to get into trying to interpret, but I'm just going to do my best. But anyway, so, and there's also a picture beside her, which was the key to getting into the Kabbalah, knowing that he was talking about the Kabbalah and the Tree of Life, because it's the lion and the elephant, and also the protective, oh, I haven't got my notes from then. It's I don't want to offend anyone who's Jewish, because it's the protective scroll that is put on Jews for Passover. Now, interestingly, we just had Passover, and that is the scroll that's put on the door, mitzvah or something. Well, anyway, I'll put it up if I find it. There's too much information. Anyway, that it represents the scroll. That's the dog at the top, funnily enough. That's the blue and red dog at the top of the picture. So that's to protect at the Passover. Now that brings in the Red Sea, which that's one of the multi-meanings of the elevator is the blood coming through is the Red Sea. It's also, so it brings in Egypt, it brings in Exodus, it brings in the Bible, brings in Genesis, there's Eve and the rest of it, and it brings in a lot. But the Passover, of course, is the protection, is putting the blood of the lamb. So that is also the blood of the lamb supposedly coming out of the elevator. It's quite amazing the layers of meaning he brought in. I won't go into all the details, but Danny is Jacob on his stone, on the rock, having his vision, his dream of Jacob's ladder. But if you go back and look at the other videos, you'll get that. I don't want to go into it again. Okay, so yeah, just pressing on from that, because that is appropriate, because it brings in the Bible and Exodus, as I said. So the next, so this is the interview, and I believe this takes, yeah, this happens, this is the first scene in the movie. So this is the imaginary window, the impossible window in the office. This is the hotel manager of the Overlook. He's got a mountain behind him, and he's got the American flag, and he's got a lot of other things. There are a lot of symbols in this, and I won't go into it because I have done in the other videos. But anyway, he's called Stuart Ullman, and that's what I wanted to bring in here, because that would seem to be an anagram of, he seems like a really nice guy, and he's got echoes of the flag and everything else, but that makes the word Satan. I think Kubrick meant him to be Satan, because the Abraxas is actually Satan, he's the fallen angel, and he actually is the ruler of the world in Gnosticism. And so the mountain behind represents Keter, and obviously, excuse me, at the top of the mountain, represented by Neptune, the planets represent Sephiroths, as you'll probably know. And that's where God actually is, the real God, the true God, the light of the world. But Satan fell down from heaven, and he is the ruler of this material world, and hence all our problems. But he seems really pleasant, but he's a liar, basically. I think that's what Kubrick was trying to say. He did have some political views in this movie too. And it's not just the American government he's calling liars, it's all governments, as we know. And, you know, the hierarchy, the patriarchy. And this is the age of Aquarius coming, so it's sort of the downfall of the patriarchy. Anyway, so that's Stuart Ullman, but he has a similarity with the Doctor, who, if you look back at that slide, not now, but if you look back at it, the Doctor is sort of his female counterpart. So that would be saying, Kubrick, I realize now that what he was saying was Satan has a female counterpart, and even the Sophia was split out. She was split into Lilith. Even Lilith is like a female counterpart of Eve or Sophia, and so there is an evil side too. Everything is dualistic in the material world, and everything has been split in two, and that was one of his big themes. So and they tell lies. Yeah. So anyway, so that's that. So I think if we go on to that, okay, so that's the red book. that is the hotel management book, and that's on Stuart Ullman's desk, Satan's desk. But I don't know what's doing on Satan's desk, because obviously it's the red book. Jung, it represents the hotel management book, but actually it's meant to be in Kubrick's layers of meaning, Carl Jung's red book, which was his sort of prophecy. He started to get visions before the First World War, and he got visions, Gnostic visions, and he illustrated the book, wrote notes, never published it. It was never published in his lifetime. But somehow Kubrick got to know of it, obviously. He obviously would have known of his book Ion, which I mentioned before, which later, when Jung was in his 80s, he did speak of his visions, and he spoke of them before in the 7 Sermons of the Dead. But anyway, that's Jung's red book. And also, I just wanted to show you this. This is very good, actually. This is Carl Jung, Wounded Healer of the Soul. The red book, you can get a copy now, in the copied illustrations, obviously, but it's very expensive. And this talks about it in very accessible terms, and beautiful illustrations in it. And it's very moving, actually. So I would recommend that. Carl Jung, Wounded Healer of the Soul by Claire Dunn. And she actually says here about the Anima Mundi. She quotes Jung. Jung says, "We have to expect a factor in the psyche that is not subject to the laws of time and space, as it is on the contrary capable of suppressing them to a certain extent. In other words, this factor is expected to manifest the qualities of time and spacelessness, i.e. eternity and ubiquity. Psychological experience knows of such a factor. It is what I call the archetype, which is ubiquitous in time and space, of course, relatively speaking. It is a structural element of the psyche we find everywhere and at all times, and it is that which all individual psyches are identical with each other, and where they function as if they were the one undivided psyche, the ancients called Anima Mundi, or the psyche to cosmo, which means the cosmic psyche." He writes a lot, obviously. That's when he became a Gnostic, although didn't admit it, couldn't admit it. And it's just as well he didn't, because it would have ruined his reputation at the time, as the church so branded Gnostics, along with astrologers and alchemists, as heretics, as we know. Anyway, if they hadn't, people might have believed that this was a serious thing when it was known about the virus, instead of poo-pooing it, because we knew about the Saturn-Pluto conjunction and Uranus conjunct the South Node of Chiron, and we took it very seriously. But that's our sadness, isn't it? That, but perhaps, as I say, the world psyche is changing through this. I believe it already is. It's already having a transformation. Anyway, so to go on to the next slide. So to explain the 4 horses. Right, so in the opening scene, Kubrick has the yellow Volkswagen going up the mountain. And the Volkswagen, I discovered later, and I can't say how because that's later in the film, it does represent the pale horse. So the pale horse is actually the 4th horse. It's introduced by the 4th seal. So it's actually the 4th horse, the pale horse. And the pale horse is called death. Now, I have to explain this because it doesn't sound, it's not as bad as it sounds. Yes, Kubrick was prophesizing the apocalypse, he was. But the apocalypse as in the awakening. The apocalypse as this really good book, and I'll show you this, called Star Myths of the World, hypothesizes and how to interpret them. This is volume 3, Star Myths of the Bible, because volume 1 and 2 are some of Norse myths, but the Roman and Greek myths are covered, and it's all about the constellations. And it's what I said, it's based on, he bases this on the book that Kubrick would have read, which was called Hamlet's Mill. And I'll have to make a note of that too, because it's by two authors and I can't remember the names at the moment, but I'll make a note of that as well on the site. Excuse me. Hamlet's Mill is about the constellations, on how all these stories of the Bible, all the stories of mythology, as we already know that, and astrologers, we certainly know that the mythology is based on the constellations. Most of us do realize that. But we didn't. Most of us don't realize that also the Bible stories are based on it. And this has been a big thing, that the church obviously made the Bible stories very literal, and has done mankind a great disservice in that, because they are meant to be taken metaphorically and as allegories, and in that they have the profound service that mythology does, because it gives you so much more information and has such a deeper meaning than a factual story would ever do. And so the Bible was hijacked. It was based on, and this is the hypothesis that Kubrick has put into The Shining from Hamlet's Mill. That's where he first read it. And these wonderful books by David Warner Matheson. He's done, as I say, 3 big volumes and another book, The Undying Stars. And I would recommend them because they describe all of it, and wonderfully. And also there's this other book that Kubrick would have found in the 60s too, The Stars, A New Way to See Them, by H.A. Rey. And he actually does bring the name Rey into the storeroom. If you see the movie, you'll understand what I'm saying. It's on the boxes. So he's making an allegation. He makes a reference to these books quite a lot. So in the Bible, the Book of Revelation, and they were all Gnostics, really. John was referring to the constellations. He wasn't saying the end of the world was going to come. He was referring to the precession of the equinoxes. So what he was doing was saying that at a certain time, and the time is in the Gnostic Gospels, and it's in Gnosticism, and it's the Kabbalah, and all these myths. The timing is excuse me. The timing is based on the Hebrew letters, mathematics. A day for a year was used very much in the Bible. In Exodus, in the wilderness, 40 days for a year. We know we use that in progressions, in secondary progressions. Anyway, so when he talked about the 4 horses, he talked about the apocalypse, and they were among the signs, obviously, for the end of days, for the last days, for the apocalypse. But the end of days was the end of Pisces, was the real reference. And that makes perfect sense to me. I don't know about you, and it sounds a lot better too. We've got enough problems. So it was the end of Pisces, the end of an age. And so the end of days, you would get all these signs. So the 4 horses are the first signs. The first horse took place just before by the Bible mathematics, which the Bible did put into the Exodus and other stories. It put these mathematics, and I can't go into them because I haven't got time, but I will do. Maybe I'll put that in the next video. But it gave the timings, and the timings, as biblical people know, they boiled it down to the First World War, 1914. And that does line up with Jung's actual visions that he got before he knew anything about Gnosticism. The visions he got about the horrors of the First World War, and that's when he wrote his Red Book. So that's the pale horse. So that's why Kubrick has the pale horse going up the mountain towards Kita, toward on the tree of life. The tree of life is reflected in the lakes, and when they get to the overlook, when he gets to the overlook, the tree of life is the map. It's the labyrinth of the outside of the hotel, the maze on the outside, the maze on the inside. It's the hotel, and it's the world, and it's the brain, it's the mind as well. It's all the map. So anyway, so there he is going up the mountain. So the next one, so that's the pale horse. That as he passes, he's just about to go into this tunnel, and he passes this white car. I mean, it could be a station wagon, it could be a limousine, I don't know. I guess it's a white station wagon, but what Kubrick has done, it's complicated. He put a black horse picture up in the apartment. That's the black horse. But then he made the other horses into cars. He symbolized them by cars. So he symbolized the white horse, I think, there by the white station wagon that's pulled on the side of the road. So that's number one, the white horse, which supposedly would appear just before the First World War. So that's the pale horse. The yellow Volkswagen passing it. So the next slide that's the black horse. So that's the only actual horse that Kubrick shows, but it's to indicate, because that's his code. I began to see what his code is after a while. You start to recognize it. So that's the code that says the cars are horses too, and because of the colors, it gives it away, and some other things. So what he's saying there too, Kubrick has a big theme in his other films as well about the mechanical universe. When you see that picture in the apartment, Wendy's on the phone, she's got a TV. No, she's watching the TV, and there's a train on the TV, and there's the sound of the train, and so he seems to be saying about the mechanical universe. The black horse is approaching the third seal. So, and it was as I say, the red horse was the start of the First World War. That was the war, symbolizing the war. The white horse took place then. That was the coming of Jesus, but not on earth. Jesus in heaven. It's complicated. The Christ consciousness, anyway. So the red horse took place, indicated the First World War. We haven't had any horses since, but now what he was saying, and he seemed to be making a prophecy about 40 years, because it's 40 years in the wilderness, and it's weird, but that's why I did put, and I think it's the next slide, I did put, or it could be the next horse. Okay, that's the next horse. So that's the red horse, that's the snowcat. That's the superimposed, that's the crossover showing the snowcat there in the garage. They're taking a tour on closing day around the hotel, around the overlook. And as they're taking the tour, actually, Stuart Ullman, the manager, actually says a comment about the last days. So that's another clue. And he says, by 5 o'clock, the place will be, in the last days, the place is deserted. It's as if no one has ever been there. And Wendy comments, like a ghost ship, huh? And he says, yes. So, and that's making a reference to the Ark as well, I believe. A ghost ship, the Ark, the last days, he actually says. So we're now in the last days of Pisces. But as I say, what's really weird is it seems like Kubrick did perhaps prophesize 40 years before it actually happened from, and I take it from the solstice, the winter solstice of 1980, because that was the year that The Shining was released. And at that solstice, there was a Saturn-Jupiter conjunction. That was in Libra. And I think if we might get the chart up for that. Next. Okay, so that's the red horse crashed. That means the red horse is gone already. That was the First World War, and and he's making a joke there too, because Stephen King wrote the actual book, used a red Volkswagen. He's made it crash, but never told him it was actually meant to be the red horse of the apocalypse. There you go. His inside joke, I'm sure. Anyway, that's when Halloran is coming up the mountain. And that's later in the movie, which I haven't got to yet. But that's the red horse crashed. The symbol of the red horse. So anyway, so that's back at the office. That's the interview again. And I go back to that because that's the red book you can see on there. On the table, it seems to be marked halfway through, and that echoes the fact that Wendy has been reading The Catcher in the Rye in the apartment. And you see Wendy superimposed there because that's the crossover from the last scene of her in the apartment. And I believe she's been superimposed there because she is standing in for, like the other crossover did, she's standing in for the Sophia, for the Great Mother, which is the picture that's on the wall outside, which we'll show in a minute. And so she's standing in for Eve, Sophia, the Great Mother. And so the spirit of Sophia, which comes in with the Aquarian age, in fact, because it is the female, the anima, the spirit that's been suppressed for years, as we know, and that it has to come back with the advent of the Aquarian age. So she's making her appearance there in the office, heralding the age of Aquarius. But anyway, another remark that is made that I didn't notice before by Jack, just before, this is the summer caretaker that's coming in, Bill Watson. Jack is going to be the winter caretaker. Winter caretaker is Capricorn, summer caretaker is Cancer. But back in the days of the Bible, they would have been, the winter would have been Aquarius, and because of the precession of the equinoxes, and the summer would have been the other one, Leo. So that's why you get the cherubims, the fixed ground cross is the cherubims, and it's the beasts in Revelation, because back then they were the winter, the summer, the spring, and the autumn. Isis also is represented by Libra, and she's the autumn. So she's representing Libra and Cancer there. So anyway, so actually, Jack makes a remark, and he says, it took me 3.5 hours to get up the mountain. When the manager asks him, did you have a good trip? 3.5 hours is important because 3.5 is mentioned in the Bible. It's 3.5, and I haven't got my notes, unfortunately, I've got so much here. But anyway, 3.5 stands for half a week. It's half of 7, which means half a week. But it also has another meaning. And I'll see if I can find it. It's too much information, but it does pertain to the apocalypse. Because 3.5, it's yeah, okay, so it says about the woman, and I'll put it in the next one, but there is in the Bible, it says that there is a woman, and she stands for the woman, and it's in Revelation, and it says, yeah, I should have had it on top. Okay, maybe I've got it. Okay, so it's Revelation 12, verses 14. But the woman was supplied with the wings of a great eagle, and there is an eagle on the windowsill. So the woman was supplied with the wings of a great eagle. The eagle, by the way, in the constellations is a villa. A villa? It's the eagle in the constellations anyway, which is right next to Aquarius. Brings in Aquarius, in fact. So that she could fly from the presence of the great serpent, Satan, into the wilderness to her place, to the retreat where she was nourished for a time and times and 1/2 time. So what time and times and 1/2 time means is 3.5. It's brilliant, isn't it? Because my partner is a Bible expert. And we never got on because obviously we just thought we were opposite poles, but now we know differently. Weird. He thought I was a heretic and I thought he was a ridiculous Bible person who took it all literally. But anyway, so he told me that's what a time and times and 1/2 time means. It's 3.5. So she was kept safe and fed for 3.5 years, or 1,260 days, which brings you, anyway, that's also, all the timing is, it's 1/2 of 7. So that means 7 years. The tribulation is 7 years. I'm not going to go into all the details now because I haven't got time, but it does mean about the apocalypse and the tribulation and everything. So he has actually Jack made a reference. It took him 3.5 hours to get up the mountain. 3.5 is very important. And there is another meaning too, and it is about the precession of the equinoxes in the Bible. So anyway, the progressions, I'll get onto that now, the 40 days and 40 nights in the wilderness, which is referred to in the Egyptian, it's only that way, that would say that the woman, the Sophia, is kept safe. So even though there is the apocalypse and will be huge problems, obviously, the black horse isn't a lot of fun. It does bring in, as I said before, it brings in lack, it brings in famine in some places. It's huge monetary problems, which we're already seeing that the virus has actually brought in. There are wars, there are pestilences, but they're not the main thing, even though this seems to be the main thing. The main thing it brings in is depression. And so there is lack. But as it says there, it's like the covenant at the start in the apartment, the rainbow is on the door of the bathroom, which is God's covenant at the ark, saying that the earth will not be destroyed, the earth will not be flooded, it will be, and those who keep my ways, or whatever the saying is so the Sophia will be protected, in other words. But there will be hardship and a long period. And I did look at the eclipses, and I'm not going to do that now, but I will do that on the next one. The eclipses that seem to line up, this eclipse that took place, this lunar eclipse. These eclipses this year are in fact the same ones that took place in 2001. They are on the Metonic cycle. And I did notice, that's what I said when in 2012, I became obsessed with the eclipses. That was one thing that happened. And I did find out the patterns of the eclipses. In the Metonic cycle, the same eclipse comes back at the same degree 3 times. And in the Metonic cycle, it's 19 years. And it goes 19 years, it returns each time. That's the solar eclipse. Lunar eclipse is slightly different. Sometimes it's 18, sometimes 19 years. But then at the 4th time, it comes back 8 years, an 8 years gap. And that's usually a very special year. That's a very, and that's sort of, it signposts things when you get 8 years. Lunar eclipse is 8 or 9 years, but that's the pattern. And so we are actually on these eclipses. We had the 2001 eclipses, obviously 19 years ago, but now we're going to have the next lunar eclipse in the same place as it took place this year, with the Saturn-Pluto conjunction very near to it on the 10th, and when the first death from the coronavirus happened. And it will take place again in 8 years' time. So, I mean, it lines up with the biblical stuff and all this, and the prophecies that it could be a 7-year period after this year. So it could be 8 years in everything. And I mean, that's a prophecy. So it's, but it does seem to line up, and I will show that next time. But anyway, the Sophia is protected, and it seems like it is the age of Aquarius, and it will change. We're seeing it change our lives already, drastically and painfully, but it is changing the world. Not that there won't be problems, there will. And it will go on for a while, but we have to have faith, and that's what Kubrick was saying. Anyway, and that's what Carl Jung was saying too. That's what many brilliant minds were saying. Okay, so this is the Great Mother that's outside, and that represents the Sophia, but it's the American a Native American Indian, and a Canadian American Indian painting. The painter is an American Native American Indian. That's Native Indian. Okay, but Kubrick put quite a few of his paintings dotted around the hotel, along with a lot of other Native American memorabilia artifacts. Anyway, so it's linked in with Jung's Red Book. It's the Gnostic Sophia it represents, and it looks a lot like Wendy, funnily enough. Okay, so push ahead. The next slide. Oh, so I put this up, as I said, because it did seem like Kubrick was tying in a 40-year period. It could be, and that he was actually sowing in a prophecy about the apocalypse, about the Aquarian age coming up around now. I mean, he would have known the astrology because he was a Kabbalist, and a Kabbalist, and a very high one, would have known astrology. So it's all very, it's a very intricate part of the Kabbalah and the Tree of Life. So anyway, so yeah, interestingly in that, and I won't go into depth because there's no time, but obviously you can see there Pluto was at 24 degrees Libra, square pretty much exactly to what it is now, and Mars there was square to it in Capricorn, in more or less the position that we had the conjunction in, a degree off, I think, yeah, 23 degrees. So that's in the place that the Capricorn conjunction, Saturn-Pluto, south node of Saturn, took place. The sun, of course, that's at midnight, because he makes several references to that, the sun at midnight, and so I wanted to put it at the solstice. So who knows, perhaps he was prophesying, and perhaps he did take this into account, because it seems very relevant. And a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Libra, and we're going to get the one in Aquarius at the solstice, pretty much, this year. Which is in Aquarius, obviously, so it's another marker on the way to the age of Aquarius. So we're getting them fast and furiously now. And he knew that. How did he knew that? Amazing. So we'll press on because we don't have time to go into it, but you can look at that, and I will say more about it next time. So I thought it would be interesting because he mentions a day for a year and the 40 days, 40 nights. So I progressed it 40 years to the solstice of this year, 2020, and that's where the progress chart would be, the progressions of this year from that chart. So interestingly, obviously, I mean, one of the most interesting things is the nodes. The nodes are 11 degrees Leo Aquarius, and the sun exactly conjunct the south node on the IC. Yeah, quite amazing. And there's Pluto rising at 24 Libra, which is square. Of course, now, as I said, it squares the Saturn-Pluto conjunction that we just had. Okay, so I'll press on because I don't want to spend too much time, but it's fascinating, and it's very likely he did know that chart. But anyway, so, or certainly yeah, he would have known. Anyway, so there's Jack, going back to the film, only a little bit of it because there's no time now, but there he is looking at the model of the maze, like the pale man, like in Guillermo del Toro's film, Pan's Labyrinth, which is another brilliant film, but based, it seems, it took a lot from The Shining, but a lot from Gnosticism. Whether he realized or not, the whole thing, I don't know, but he certainly realized the link to Gnosticism in it because it's too similar. Anyway, so he's like the pale man of del Toro's looking at the maze. So he's looking down at the maze, and they are outside simultaneously in the garden, in the maze outside the hotel, Danny and Wendy playing in the maze. And he's looking down, and then he starts to see their figures. He imagines their figures, their tiny figures in the maze. And we'll go on to the next slide, because as he's looking, he takes on, so it starts to look like a very, very big maze. In fact, it takes on, it looks like a world maze. And I think Kubrick, what he's saying is the world. He's saying about the Anima Mundi now, and about the world, and about Abraxas looking down, about the demiurge looking down on the world, and emulating God. Yeah, so if we go on to the next one. And there he is actually after that's afterwards, and he's taken on the figure of Abraxas, of Satan, of the lords of Baal. He's got the horns behind him. He's got, that's Dionysus, a picture of Dionysus, which Dionysus is the dual god, both good and evil, a Christ figure and also the evil twin. So he's taking on the evil twin now of Abraxas and the demiurge, and he's got the furnace behind him, and he's got that Hopi painting I was talking about, that Hopi mural that he throws his ball up with. He throws a ball sacrilegiously at it with no respect. So he's got no respect for the sacred arts, and he's got a furnace behind him. So he is taking on the role of the demiurge of Abraxas there. The furnace brings you on to the other, the lords of Baal, which is in the next slide. Okay, so it's not, okay, so that's the, so that is, he's actually going into the Qliphoth now. The Qliphoth is the dark tree. It's the other side of the tree of life, which is obviously in the hotel as well. So like the tree of life is in the hotel, the tree of death is in the hotel, the Qliphoth. And it's very much in probably most of the hotel, in fact. It's, yeah, it represents the material world and the Qliphoth. So at the top, you've got, instead of God and Kether, you've got Satan and Moloch. Moloch, and I won't go into all of those right now, I'll bring them up next time because I haven't got time. But you see Lilith is there, and Baal and Samael and all of them. They are the demons, they're the fallen angels. They are the counterparts of the angels that are of the tree of life above. Okay, so if we go on to the next one, pressing ahead. So Moloch, that's at the top, and Moloch, Baal was they were the lords that, the Canaanites lords that worshipped Moloch. Moloch is the bull god. This was in the age of Taurus, and there was, the big thing was child sacrifice among the Canaanites, the Phoenicians. And it's funny because it has been said maybe the Romans exaggerated that, and because obviously they hate Carthage. They destroyed Carthage, which was where the Phoenicians were in Canaan. But actually lately there have been digs, and they have found child burial grounds that seem, they've even tested them for DNA and everything, and the remains, and have found they were burned. And yeah, it looks, and thousands and thousands and thousands of them. It wasn't just, yeah. So it looks like it was true. Anyway, a terrible thing, the child sacrifice, the child was put on the burning, yeah, into a burning statue, a bronze statue of the god Moloch, and sacrificed to the god alive. This is brought in because the Gnostics brought it in because they said that that it represented the deep evil. It represented Abraxas and Satan and the Wetiko mind that was there thousands of years ago and is still in the world. And we need to be aware of it. And in the age of Aquarius, we will be aware of it. We will awaken to it. And it seems like that's happening. The Gnostics always knew about it. And so the interesting thing here too is the arch enemy of the lords of Baal was, of course, Elijah, who was the one prophet left who objected, who tried to stop the child sacrifices and asked God for help to do it, because it wasn't God's will, it was Satan's. So God instructed the prophet Elijah to stop them, and he sent down a thunderbolt. It's a long story, But anyway, Elijah actually became, in the Kabbalah, in the Gnostic teachings and the Tree of Life, he became the angel Sandalphon. And turns out an angel Sandalphon is in The Shining, as well as Baal, who, the interesting thing, in the constellations, each constellation takes on, a figure can be taking on multiple roles. So you can have one person take on, one constellation is doing dual roles for different mythologies, different Bible stories. They're the same constellations, but they take on, and this constellation, there is an altar in the constellations, and that there are other things that you, I don't have time, but I will do it next time. I'll show it in the constellations. But anyway, so in the constellation, so Elijah, the prophet Elijah, was Sandalphon. When he died, he was made an angel, and he was like Metatron, who's at the right hand of God, up at near the top of the tree. Chokmah, I think he's in that place. He has Sandalphon down on earth as his sort of his agent, to work on earth for God's good. And so Halloran is in the role of Sandalphon, and to understand that, you'll have to go back to the other videos, because it's complicated. But anyway, so there he is. Baal has appeared in the form of Jack as the arch enemy of Elijah, alias Sandalphon. The plot thickens, and yeah, the game's on, and the war is on, and the Age of Aquarius is rising up. Anyway, so, and the next video will be Danny is tempted to go into room 237, and that has multiple meanings as well. And I think I've discovered a lot of them. Yeah, so that'll be interesting. So the story continues, and so does our real life story. But let's have faith and compassion. It's all good. Might not seem like it. Okay. That's that. Okay.
Okay, Michaela, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Looking forward to seeing you next time.
Yes, absolutely.